Junior Bacon Chi, it's not clear to me that you believe in metaphysics. I mean, the way you start off talking about it, which begins you getting into how detailed you would make your definitions in some situation, you're talking about them the way I think of them. The way I think of principles or posited ideas is they're foundational principles on conditional reasoning. It's like, if I make a plan to go to breakfast tomorrow morning, it doesn't mean I think I know for a fact that the sun is going to come up. It means, well, what if the sun's going to come up? What should I plan? If the sun comes up, do you want to go get breakfast? You don't even have to mention that. It's just a plan. It's conditional on, you know, the situation you're predicting. For like that tomorrow exists for you, that you're not dead, and so on and so forth. So when you make a conditional assumption, you're not saying it's absolutely true, and I'm not sure if you understand a priori and metaphysics the way I'm talking about it. I mean, sometimes there's things like the idea of cause and effect. And to say they're a priori and mean that you posit them for some experiment you're designing, that's different than the traditional idea that they're metaphysics and a priori. See, that is the idea that there's only one way, that it naturally draws and is self asserting. And you ask, how could you even have an experiment without an idea, a clear idea of cause and effect? It would be nonsense if you did it. Well, yes and no. I mean, you need some sort of an approximation. And it's good to have a very clear technical, and I'm fond of clear, concise technical definitions myself. Now, I don't believe they can be perfect as you hypothesized, but they can be pretty good. But if you go into the two-slit experiment, as we as a culture did with Newtonian assumptions, you end up with nonsense as well. Just like if you went in with no idea of cause and effect, it makes a mess of the idea of cause and effect. Now, right there, whatever we want to call cause and effect probably needs to be repaired and have another name. But it's deeper than that, because really the idea of cause and effect isn't as useful as we think. There's a lot of other ways to get at the essence of cause and effect. And it looks like to me that cause and effect comes from, our will power. Because in real life, in the macroscopic world, the cause doesn't really precede the effect, right? I pick this up. When does this go floating in the air? It's when I pick it up. It's not after. It's during. They're simultaneously. The sense of previousness to the cause has to do with the fact that we willed the cause and we saw it coming. And then the effect was the result. And we generalize this. But that's the kind of cause and effect that you have at the macroscopic, intellectual level of a, you know, neurological network. I don't think that's probably a good way to abstract cause in the real world. And sure enough, in quantum mechanics, it breaks down. And instead of really, you can talk about it as cause if you want, but instead of talking about it as cause, people are talking about concepts of symmetry and conservation of energy. And I really think that's what comes down, that's what cause and effect comes down to. Cause and effect is like a symptom of the conservation of energy, or just in general, the law of conservation in general. Okay, that is where the concept of continuity comes from, even though there is not actual continuity, even though there's discrete jumps. You want to rely on the idea of cause and effect, but I'll give you an example of how cause and effect is difficult. And it doesn't take quantum weirdness, just regular old quantum scale, just uh, the photoelectric effect. Not even quantum mechanics, but just, atomic scale physics. When a when an atom releases a photon, or an electron releases a photon. What caused that? I mean, theoretically, it's the photon that atom absorbed, that gave it the energy. The photons plural. Is it, and so which one of the photons gets credit? Is it always the last photon it might have been about to emit anyway? And the photons it absorbs are of a variety of wavelengths, and the one it emits is going to be emitted in a new direction, and it will be from the spectra of that atom, but it'll be a separate new wavelength. Might happen to be the same, but basically it's recreated new photon of a new amount of energy, and which of those absorptions caused it? It's hard to answer that. Tracing that is now hard because of the discontinuity or the discrete. It's not a discontinuity because continuity is related to conservation of energy, which is maintained. But it is instead, we could call it discrete. These discrete jumps, the fact that the absorption happens in a discrete jump and the emission happens in a discrete jump, and they're separated. And instead of a cause and effect where you want to trace that input photon specifically to the output photon, when in quantum mechanics it says there's some probability and randomness to what the emission is, then instead of cause and effect, you've got ideas of symmetry and conservation of energy. It's like, well, eventually that atom has to emit the energy that it's absorbed. It's a symmetry. It's a symmetrical view of what has to happen. Let's see, what has to happen, I say, rather than, what the causes and effects are. So cause and effect isn't that great of a concept. It needs to be fixed. The basic idea that things are happening, yeah, that's fine, but like used cause and effect is a little more specific than that. Now the issue of it is metaphysics has to do with this indeniability. And so are you talking about this kind of thing? Do you think that we have to posit certain indeniable truths? Because I believe for an experiment we have to posit an idea of cause and effect, but when we find out it doesn't work, we could create a new one. And I guess you're saying the shape is such that, without any examples, we can create all. I don't believe that. The whole thing of you can create shapes that you don't have examples for. No, you might be able to create a pentagram when you have seen triangles, but that doesn't mean that you can really. That's because you can break the triangle down into pieces and reproduce it. What about shapes in weird mathematical coordinate systems you had never heard of? Could you really picture those until you've seen them, or somehow generated them? You could possibly generating them by a method that you don't know what you're generating, and then see them and understand it. Or what about higher dimensional spaces? Can you imagine the shapes in there? Why not? Can you think of a legit reason that if we have this faculty to imagine a priori truths about shapes, why it would be so limited? I can't. I think when we check these ideas that last so long, we have concepts that last thousands of years, maybe millions in evolution, but certainly we could trace some of them thousands of years, and that makes them pretty good. But when they do break down, how is it? It's from testing in reality. I don't really understand how, even if we had a good idea, how would you know? You're saying this idea is really good. How would you know? Well, because it stood up in reality. Otherwise, you don't. Cause and effect. We say we get that a priori. Some people, I'm not sure if you are, and it's really, really good and amazing. We have to explain how we got such an amazing thing, not from our experiences. But wait a second, how do we know it's amazing? Oh, because from our experience, it applies 100% of the time, we think. So that's why we think it's so good. We have to explain how we got it, not from experience, because our experience confirms it's awesome. I think it came from experience, maybe so long ago that we just evolved around this idea, and now our brain just thinks it naturally. But my experience is that I can still overcome that assumption and think of it a new way.